Oh, yes.
So John has traveled to more than 50 countries across 6 continents and throughout the US. He currently lives in Washington, D.C., and he holds a master's degree in geography, has served 2 years in the Peace Corps teaching English in Uzbekistan, and he is currently embarking on an entrepreneurial journey to create a more travel-centric lifestyle and prefers to include a human interaction component everywhere he goes. So, John, you the stage here.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thank you to the Nomadic Network for having me. This is really exciting. So, all right. Well, as Stephanie mentioned, I've traveled quite a bit, and I think in the course of over 25 years of traveling, I've realized maybe I travel just a bit differently than some people do. I would get people telling me, why would you go there, when I mentioned, where I'm either about to go or have been. And also I hear people say that they're bored if they go to some place. So those kind of things made me think, I don't ever get bored. So how can I get, tell people a few things of what I do to make trips interesting, no matter if it's a trip that I've specifically planned, or if I just happen to be somewhere or am going from point A to point B. So here are just a few situations that you might find yourself in that aren't a specific destination that you've planned out. People make holiday trips to go to the beach or to Disney World or whatever, but sometimes you're in other situations, like just a random road trip, getting from point A to point B, visiting friends and relatives. You might be on a work trip somewhere in a city that you've never been to. Maybe you just have some time off that you want to use before they take it away. There's all sorts of different circumstances or situations. Maybe you found a good travel deal. Maybe you're going to a wedding or a graduation. There are eclipses. People go to watch eclipses. So there's lots of different situations that you can kind of make a trip out of, or use these concepts to kind of think outside the box when you are going to different places. Of course, my favorite is just because it's there, because I like to go everywhere. So I found this quote and I just thought it was pretty meaningful for this presentation, because really exploration is curiosity put into action. And that is my mission. I really want people to expand that curiosity, look into going outside of the typical bucket list destinations that everybody goes to, because using the curiosity and the explorer's mindset really helps you think of a different way to travel. And that way you're less likely to be bored, you're more likely to have memorable experiences, and then be open to a lot more options when you travel. So for me, it started very young. Yes, I started collecting things when I was probably 4. My mom is a big collector, so she got me into ABCs was the first thing. My dad gave me his father's stamp collection when I was about 5 or 6. And then my cousin would tell me all these stories about traveling all over the world. And so all of those things together kind of piqued my interest. I was very inquisitive and curious, and that has not stopped. So these are just some things that, as Stephanie mentioned, these are some of my travel credentials that I've traveled quite a bit, and I use a lot of the tactics and techniques on my travels that I'm going to be talking about today. And the term explorer, we tend to kind of think of that as an old-fashioned term, the discoverers and explorers of the world, everything's already mapped out. But really, anytime you travel, whether it's to a new place or a place you've been to before, you have the opportunity to tap into something new. There's always going to be a new thing, a new experience that you could have. And that's the mindset that I'm going to try to get across today. So a lot of what I'll be talking about does talk about or does center on road trips, but really a lot of these things can be applied to any type of travel, whether it's domestic or international, whether you have transportation or not. But speaking of road trips, when I travel, I really think getting off the highways, the main roads are the best. If you go on the blue highways, which is the old-fashioned term for back roads, there you're going to find the more interesting things, the stuff that's unexpected, things that might pique your curiosity. I just think that is the best. And there's some, I'll be talking a little bit more about that. Always talk to people when you travel, whether it's domestic or international. Get a sense of the community, of the people. They're likely to know all the cool places to go, but also you'll just have a meaningful experience if you have a conversation. And then just walk around aimlessly. I do that all the time. You just never know what you're going to discover if you just turn the corner and find something of interest. And then when you're shopping, either for a restaurant or business, avoid the chain stores. You can have that experience anywhere in the world. Sure, maybe McDonald's have different food in different countries, but for the most part, the mom and pop, the local, regional, even businesses are the best because you get the more authentic experience and you have that local flavor that you just can't get other places. I really love signs because they give you a personality of a place, like this sign here, but also just regular geographic signs of the name of the town, business signs that illustrate kind of what that town or what that place is like. And even you can kind of expand that into things like mistranslated menu items or translated signs on the businesses, especially in different countries. That can be humorous. Using your smartphone or any mapping app, you can look at the little icons. So like the little pictures of like the restaurants and the physical features and geographic features. I've often discovered stuff even near where I live that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't looked at those maps on the phone. When you do plan road trips or any type of trip, it's good to optimize your route so that you kind of know if you're going from point A to point B that, oh, there's something of interest just 5 miles off the road. So you want to kind of map that out and see to include all the things so you're not backtracking, but at the same time, you want to be flexible. Because what if you talk to some locals and they invite you to a party? You don't want to, if you want to go, then you don't want to have to stick to your itinerary. You really want to be flexible so that you have those serendipitous moments that will make your trip very memorable. A good way to help you with your curiosity is just ask questions. Try to imagine, where did this place come from? Why did it get its name? Why was it located in this particular place? What's the history? Is there some sort of 15 minutes of fame, or did some event happen here that caused something specific that might be worth seeing? Also, when you're exploring, like I mentioned earlier, just walking around, maybe you can look in the distance. I often see maybe a building or a top of a spire of a church or something, and it just makes me like, oh, well, what's over there? So I'll just kind of explore. So those are questions that you can kind of ask yourself to see if you can get curious about the place that you're in. So great way to either make an entire trip or design a trip, or to just incorporate into any place that you happen to be, is to incorporate your interests and hobbies. So this is a list that I came up with just off the top of my head of very broad themes that you could use to make a trip or enhance any place that you happen to be traveling. So just, food and drink, obviously looking for, all the coffee shops or beer, tea, tacos, specific kinds of food, Thai food. You can just make entire trips related to things that you're interested in that area. And of course, all of these different options could be expanded to all sorts of directions depending on what you're interested in. I'll just mention a few, flowers, plants, gardens, arboretums, parks, If you're into geology, you might want to find places that are related to, gems and rocks. Of course, there's all sorts of different natural attractions, monuments, and different cultural features. And genealogy and family tree, family history. Lots of options there to incorporate into your travels. So this is a very simple suggestion, but really it is useful. Just when you're trying to find things to do, just Google it. What is there to do in X city? Looking at specific events that are happening, this weekend in a place. If you're in a city of any size, you're probably going to find something going on in the time that you're there. So you just never know if it's something that just is interesting. Maybe it's something you wouldn't normally do, but because you're there, you're going to give it a try because you're curious, right? So these are just a few other ideas of things that you can Google. I find that city websites or tourist bureaus in different cities often give different suggestions for things to do. It's also good to see if there is maybe a free walking tour, or even if it's not free, it's a great way to explore a new place. And then you can maybe find more things you're interested in. And also look to see if you can find if there's a free activities or discounted events or something going on that is specifically on sale for a particular weekend, and that could help you plan a trip as well. I also like to use Google Earth. It's fun to just get a sense of the topography. You can just type in the name of a place and the little globe will spin around and you can see the area around it. You can also use the street view if that's available. And oftentimes there's pictures of the place, so it gives you a sense of what's going to be there. And then they have tools like Voyager, and then you can roll the dice to just takes you to a totally random place. I find this to be a cool way to kill, like if you have 5 minutes to spare in between something, you're waiting for something, or if you're stuck at home because you're sick or it's raining or something like that. So one of my favorite off the beaten track type of resources is Atlas Obscura. So if you're not familiar with that, it's really a large community of explorers and people that have really created this database that has just about everything. There's all sorts of interesting places, different foods, cultural experiences. They have books now, they're selling courses, but what I really like is the mapping feature. So if you just zoom in on a map of anywhere in the world and you find the little green dot icon, it'll show you a place that somebody has entered into there. It's a little bit weird, hence the name Atlas Obscura, right? You want something that's a little bit odd, but to me, those things are the things that are memorable, right? So when I was in Pocahontas, Arkansas last month, I would never have probably paid any attention to this meteorite, which, by the way, is just a rock, but don't tell the town that. So this is just an example of something that it makes it kind of a funny memory because I didn't spend that much time there, but I'll remember it because of this random rock that I found on Atlas Obscura. So just one of many examples. I mentioned before events. There are so many opportunities to look at different kinds of events, whether you happen to be in a place or if you want to make a trip specifically out of events. Like the first thing on this list is concerts. Some people follow their favorite musical groups all around the country or maybe even internationally. But at the same time, you could be in another city, maybe you're stationed somewhere for a few weeks for work, and maybe you want to look up to see if there's a concert going on there. So that's just an example of how you can use these as a way to enhance your trip. I will say things like religious processions or holidays, national days, especially in other countries, you can really get a rich cultural experience by seeing how the locals spend their holidays or, their national days in, in another place. So these are just some other types of events and festivals, but there's hundreds and hundreds of more that you can look up and find something interesting. So some more resources that I like to use when I am planning my trips. I still use Yelp a lot because you really can get a sense of the ratings. If you're in a place you don't know and you're just passing through, looking up on Yelp, if you have 700 people that are giving something a 4.5, 5-star rating, it's probably going to be good. At the same time, if that many people are giving it a 2-star rating, you might want to avoid it. I like to use it because it just sometimes does give me really good recommendations. And similarly with TripAdvisor, that's been around for so long. There's so many different mom and pop businesses and places that you can only find there. And also different places, sites to see, things like that. And there's been so many people that have, they have a forum there that travelers can communicate with each other. So these next two, if you're really into history, you might find these interesting. I just discovered this historical marker database. It's really like any type of historical marker, whether it's a state-sponsored one or maybe a locally made one. And I looked up a couple examples and it's quite detailed. So if you're really into that, you could use that to map out places to go. And similarly with the National Register of Historic Places, these are usually buildings that have been deemed worthy of historical preservation. So you can make a point of specifically going to all the National Register places in a different place every time you travel. And then everybody's heard of Airbnb to stay, but they also have experiences. So things like excursions or a cooking class, or maybe making some sort of jewelry. There's all sorts of different options you can sign up, and you can do that at home as well. But it might be something fun to do when you're traveling. And then these couchsurfing, I really like couchsurfing as an organization. It's a membership organization for travelers, basically strangers to meet. You would stay with them or they could stay with you. But really, you don't have to do that. You don't have to stay in their house. What you can use couchsurfing for is to just meet other people in other places, or even get recommendations. You don't even have to meet up with them. You can ask them for their suggestions on the cool bars to go or things like that. Great resource. And then eatwith.com, thanks to Erica for this wonderful suggestion. So this is kind of like an Airbnb for dinner parties. So imagine if you're in rural Italy and you have the chance to go to somebody's house where they're making food. That is going to be an amazing experience. You're going to have the cultural interaction. You're going to have actual fresh homemade food, probably for the cost of what it would be to go out to a restaurant. So that is a really cool option to interact with food when you're traveling. And then of course, Meetup is still around to find all sorts of different groups, basically anywhere. Travel blogs, obviously Nomadic Matt. I mean, if you haven't used a travel blog when you're traveling, really consider that, because it really is helpful, especially with specific places. For some of the trips that we've made, we used these blogs and got so many different suggestions that I was just not able to find using Google or other suggestions online. Plus, it's kind of concise and it's written by somebody who's been there or who at least knows a little bit more about it. And then you can also follow bloggers that have specific types of niches. There's tons of them. I just listed a few that I thought were interesting. YouTube, another great resource to give you that visual sense. If you want to see or get a sense of what a place is like, you can just go to YouTube and look for a particular city, a particular country, a region, anything. just looking at a few minutes of footage will give you that sense of what it's like there. Maybe you'll hear some sounds and the language and things like that. You can look up, you know, the top 10, whatever, top 7 things to do or what not to do. I've found those to be kind of funny too. And then of course, drone footage is a great way to get that overview of a place. And I think it's often very compelling. Some of the most beautiful scenery is from drones, and you would discover stuff that you wouldn't have thought of if you just saw the name of the place. So these YouTubers are just a few that that I like to follow. Kara and Nate are super, they just go everywhere and they're just relatable and they tell the story. You feel like you're there. So it's a good way to get a sense of different places. David's been here. He focuses on food all over the world, and it definitely will maybe make you want to go to a particular country because of seeing the amazing food. Fearless and Far, who I had the fortune to meet at TravelCon last month, he really encouraged you to get outside of that comfort zone and go experience adventure. Very adventurous, fun experiences that he has. And Itchy Boots, she rides motorcycles all over the world. Right now, she's going from South America to Alaska. And you get a very different view of the world through the lens of being on a motorcycle. So these are just some YouTubers that I like to follow. Bald and Bankrupt and Indigo Traveler tend to go to those dangerous or off the beaten track countries. But I think it's also important to show that not every place is as dangerous as the news says. Of course, there are travel podcasts and travel themed books. Some of my favorite books I've listed here. I will say that I think nowadays we tend to think of travel guidebooks as a bit passe because you can just look everything up, but really I would not discount them because you can still find a lot of information. It's all curated, it's all put together, and it just has an itinerary, some suggestions, things that you may not be able to find elsewhere. These podcasts, so Amateur Traveler is good because it's one destination, an interview with somebody that's recently traveled there, and then they kind of go through an itinerary. So it gives you a sense, especially some of the more unusual destinations. They have popular destinations as well, but I've heard episodes where they talk about Chad, the country in Africa. But it kind of, it's interesting. You hear stuff that you wouldn't have thought about. Counting Countries is a podcast that focuses on people that are traveling to or either have traveled or are planning to travel to every country in the world. So those interviews tend to be quite long, but it's interesting to get a sense from those people. And then Zero to Travel is probably the most accessible to everyone type of podcast because it is for just encouraging you to get out there and explore and travel and just do it. So Facebook groups, yes, I really like Facebook groups. It's opened my eyes to a lot of different information as well as ideas for places to go. Again, every passport stamp, if you really want to know how to travel to Equatorial Guinea or Kiribati or other places that maybe you've never heard of, every passport stamp is an excellent resource to have, for travelers who would have just come back from there, and they'll put their trip reports and all the details, very helpful. And then I really like ghost towns and abandoned places. So I'm part of a lot of different Facebook groups, such as Forgotten Missouri, Old and Interesting Places in Kansas. There's probably one for every state, and there's multiple types of groups like that. So you can search stuff that you're interested in, regions, interests, hobbies, all sorts of different options for Facebook groups. So here's just a few more suggestions that you can think through when you're traveling. Of course, museums, most places have some museums, but I like to go to city or regional museums because you can get a sense of the place of where you are. And you, again, you probably will learn something that you wouldn't have known otherwise if you go there, and then maybe you can go explore that place that you've learned. Day tours, what I mean by that is something you don't have to plan too far in advance. It's not like a tour group. It might be a van that fits up to 10 people. They make 5 or 6 stops, whether it's within a place or maybe around the area. And they're usually more affordable than if you had to rent a car and then pay for all of the, the gas and the entrance to the museums and stuff like that. So I really like those. Also, some cities have the hop on, hop off bus. You can also get long distance train tickets that are good for a day, and you can get on and off at each stop or however, wherever you want to. During the pandemic, we all were looking for places to get away from people outside in nature. And I know I discovered a lot of trails and parks and different natural attractions in the area that I live that I don't think I would have otherwise known. So don't discount things like that too. Look up, there's lots of apps that can help you find trails and different outdoor things. So the 2-block rule is really just if you're in a crowded or touristy location, the idea is if you just go 2 blocks away from where all the hubbub is, you're probably going to find a place that's a little bit more local, a little bit more authentic, and less crowded. So just get away from the crowd and find something interesting. Another aspect that you could use is to travel in the off season or the fringe seasons. That not only could be cheaper, but it gives you a sense of how those people, those locals live during times that aren't the most popular times of the year. Excuse me for a second. Smaller cities instead of bigger cities. Some of those smaller cities have enough information or enough to keep you occupied for a weekend. Visiting less popular destinations. Everybody wants to go to Paris in the summer. I mean, I'd love to go to Paris, but maybe if you consider something else, and maybe in an off season, you'll have both probably a cheaper experience. You won't have to pay as much, because you're not traveling during the height of when everybody else is, but you're going to have a more authentic, more memorable time because you've learned all of this stuff, right? And if you look, for example, at Poland, I picked because a lot of people just don't really think of Poland as an amazing destination. But if you look at YouTube and see some of the stuff that's in Poland, you're going to go there, you're going to have an amazing time, and you can apply that same concept to just about anywhere because there's always something to discover and see. And I mentioned Scott's cheap flights. I know many people are probably already familiar with them. But if you're not, it's a annual membership, you pay a fee, and then they send you discount flight deals that just are probably only valid for a few days. So you have to act quickly. It helps to be flexible, but I often let Scott decide my travel destination because if I find a cheap deal and the timing works, then why not go there? Because I already know I'm going to have a good time, right? That's how we ended up going from DC to Tahiti for less than $500. And the annual, I forget what the annual membership fee is, but buying a ticket for less than $500 to go to Tahiti, it's paid for itself for years. And then of course, if you are into travel hacking, you can use points and miles to optimize your trip. It's also important to get a sense of what not to do when you're traveling. You don't want to go to all the tourist traps. You kind of want to know what are some things to avoid. what are the scams? What are the bad places? I mean, I guess if you want to, you can actually make an entire trip out of just going to the bad things. That could be your own way of making it fun. But my point here is really don't just sit in your hotel and say you're bored, because there's always something to discover. Just look at what there is to do. So one thing to spice up your travels is to make a quest out of it. So I think most people are familiar with the concept of a quest, but really what I'm talking about is a multi-stage, complicated, probably, or at least an intricate type of travel event. It's probably not going to happen all at once. It's going to take time. Some things can take up to years to do. And it should be a challenge, because that's part of what makes it interesting and memorable. Here are a few suggestions or ideas how you might come up with your own type of quest. Again, investigate your interests. Think about what it is that you get excited about, both at home and when you're traveling, and try to see if you can, make a quest about it. You don't have to visit every country in the world, but maybe every Europe country, or maybe every state, maybe all the capital cities, or just the capital buildings. There are state parks, national parks, local parks. There are the tallest peaks, the lowest points. There are those types of things. And then there's also actions that you can do. Make a quest to buy something specific every time you go on a trip somewhere. You could go play a round of golf every time you go somewhere. Get a haircut, run a marathon. There's all sorts of different options. You could look at women-owned businesses and go to all of those in a particular area. Find all of the African-American owned businesses in your own city, and make it a point to visit those. So these are some ideas just to come up with a quest to just make things more interesting. So there's also some travel related games that you could play. I would say I don't do these myself, but of course, geocaching is probably the most popular, and it's like a worldwide treasure hunt. There are different things that are hidden, and you use your GPS to kind of find it. I could see this as being something really fun for like a family trip, but I know lots of adults that do it, and it could be a way to spice up your trip. Wave marking, I'm less familiar with, but I know that is it's actual locations that have been categorized, and people just use those categories and then describe more information about it. And then of course, Pokemon Go, it's a bit different, but it's using gaming and the real life to find those digital Pokemon characters. So, and it's still popular. So these are some ways that you can incorporate that into your travels if you want to. Another idea is to make themes out of your travels. Pick a theme and make it happen. So we went to Wheeling, West Virginia, one of those places that people would say, why do you go there? Well, it happened to be before Halloween, and we had a really good time because everything seemed to have a bit of a Halloween theme to it. So that is another idea. Here's just a few examples of how you can think of a theme for your trip. I thought college campuses, some people take their kids around to see different campuses. You can make a whole trip out of that. Baseball stadiums, you name it, right? And then you can do volunteering or charity or even social justice, whether that's where you are traveling or making a trip specifically about that. So just things like volunteering in a homeless shelter, picking up trash, transporting rescue animals, or going to a protest or demonstration. And then these are just a few examples of my hobbies and interests that I've incorporated. I have collected stamps, postage stamps, postmarks. So I pretty much go to post offices everywhere I travel. This is in Anguilla in the Caribbean. And then I mentioned ghost towns. So this is actually a church that was on the cover of a book. So I had to go there. And this little park is the smallest park, and it's in Portland. And I just had to seek it out because it was one of those Atlas Obscura type of weird things. And then of course, beer. I love craft beer, so I plan to go to breweries every place I go. So I will just give you some advice to follow the weirdest path, because that's where the interesting stuff is. And remember, curiosity did not kill the cat. It just gave it 9 lives. So that's it for me. This is where you can find me. And I'm happy to send out the slides to, if you send me an email, I'm happy to send you my slide deck. I know you'll get the recording, but yeah, feel free to reach out to me. And I guess it's time for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. That was so fun. Feel free to stop sharing your screen. I put all your information in the chat, and then we can. So one of the questions, I think, from Carolyn. Let me see. From Sarah. She asked, I think you might have gone over this, but what are your hobbies that you look for on your trips?
Oh yeah, so I have I have quite a bit. Some of them I mentioned right at the end there. So for me, I have been interested in stamps and postmarks. So I go to post offices in little tiny towns all over the country, especially, and I'll go in and I'll buy a postcard usually, and I ask them to stamp the postcard. So it's kind of like a passport stamp for the places that I go. And I've been doing this for 30 some years. I used to actually write and mail it, but it's too expensive. So now I just make it a part of the trip. So it's kind of a cool way for me to collect those and then have mementos from my trips that I've been to these little tiny towns, and it helps me remember the town. I have an experience. Sometimes I've chatted with the postmaster, and you just never know what kind of people you're going to meet, and it makes it fun and memorable. Another thing is like craft beer. I've made beer vacations where I map out a place that, so here's kind of a good scenario. So when I go back to Kansas to visit my family, I usually try to make one road trip with an overnight. And I will research a place I've never been, like a small town, small city, and I'll look to see if they have a brewery, they have a coffee shop, and just get a sense of maybe some restaurants or whatever. And it's like, okay. And then I'll start looking up some of the other things that like on Atlas Obscura and other suggestions. And so pretty much for one night or even a weekend, there's enough to do. And I often leave and I haven't done everything, even in these small towns. So that's how I really like to incorporate my hobbies and stuff into the travels. Let's see what else. I also, as I mentioned, my mom's a collector. Hi, Mom. She's on. She collects cookbooks, and she really likes to read newspapers from different places because, and I didn't mention newspapers, but, looking at the stories and how the news is put together really does give you a sense of the place. And of course, there's lots of information in the newspaper. It might tell you about, an event going on, things like that. There's also those type of guides that, like entertainment newspaper type of guides. But anyway, so she collects those. So when I travel, I make it a point to pick those up where I go so that I can bring them back. So it's kind of like, it gives me something to do on the trip. It makes it memorable. And then, yeah, that's just another few examples. I've tried to reduce the number of things that I collect because it's a bit out of hand, or it has been. Yeah, I think those are the main ones, but.
Thank you. And then Mary asked, what is dark tourism? She said it was on your list. So
Yeah. I mean, and I used the term here really to represent anything that has that's related to death. So that could, I think officially it would be things like visiting a Holocaust museum, visiting a, you know, a site that is probably going to be a bit emotional and, you know, a negative emotion, but, you know, those are real events that happen. And I think it's important to have that, you know, to get that feeling. When I was in Poland, talking about Poland earlier, I did go to Auschwitz, and I mean, I just got chills just saying it. I mean, the memory of that, and that was 20 some years ago. Um, you know, that it's the kind of tourism, you know, people tend to think of vacation and tourism as fun and, you know, Instagram and let's, you know, it's just, it can be, but then it's important to see the things that are important to see. I mean, it's whatever you want to see. If you're really into history, I certainly didn't want to miss something that important. So those are some examples. Yeah, and so the picture I had was, it's called the Sedlec ossuary. An ossuary is like a building or that's got skulls, and it was a real place in the Czech Republic that's made out of human skulls. So yeah, that fits under dark tourism. So.
Yeah. And then Janet asked, what was the ghost town that you went to that was on the book? She also.
That was Arena, North Dakota. And there was a series of books called The Ghost, I think it's The Ghosts of North Dakota. And North Dakota is, if you are into ghost towns, I will tell you North Dakota is a good one because, and I think we tend to think of ghost towns as the ones that are a little bit more popularized. Like in California, there's some that, you know, you would go in, but what I'm mostly talking about is just towns that have, you know, were more popular before and just kind of died or are dying. You'll see a small downtown with an abandoned building or a couple of abandoned buildings, things like that. So that's kind of what I mean by that. But that was Arena, North Dakota.
Thank you. And then Caroline asked, how are you finding things given that we're still sort of in a pandemic right
now? Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of all over the place. I mean, sometimes you'll go to places and you won't notice any difference from before because it's you know, especially the small towns. I on my road trip that I recently took through kind of Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, there were some towns that I went to and I didn't see any people. So there was no, you know, it was during the day, so some people might be at work, but I'm finding a lot of different things. I will say I have not been international since the pandemic. So I'm hoping to do that later this year. Fingers crossed that I can figure out, I'm eyeing a conference in Armenia, the Extraordinary Travel Festival. I mean, that's got my name written all over it. So I just, but yeah, I'm not really seeing, especially in the small towns, too many differences. There's still evidence of masks and things like that here and there. But yeah, but I mean, I will say that I ended up getting COVID after avoiding it for 2 years. So that's why I'm drinking a lot more water than I normally am, because I still have a residual cough. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Perfect. And then Dave asked, how can we assuage our guilt for using so much carbon in traveling?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, no, I I don't have a great answer for that, but I know especially with, you know, you can carbon offset when you fly. I try, you know, gas obviously being so super expensive. I know it's harder to buy the more environmentally friendly gas if there is such a thing. But I guess I try to compensate it by doing other things. That's really my my best suggestion there. But yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, and I actually just saw that we have an event coming up in August. How to reduce your carbon footprint by traveling more. So that should be an interesting one to answer
That's
that
a good
question.
one. Yeah.
Pankaj asked if age would be an issue to travel around the globe.
Age? No. I mean, it's really it's more about, I mean, obviously there, with there's certain limitations for, minors and things like that. And then of course, I guess there are certain age restrictions for certain things, but not, it's more about physical and how you know yourself and are comfortable about getting around, and your mobility when you travel. But I would say age has never been, actually in a lot of countries, the elders get the best treatment. um, I'm not sure if I want to claim being an elder at this point, but but it's, if you might be the oldest person there, I guess I will say, especially in the, like, one of my favorite less popular destinations is Tajikistan. And I didn't meet that many travelers there. And so because of that, people are curious too. They know that you are not from there. They look at you and they're just like, wow, this person came to my country and my little village, and they're just very friendly and curious. And the language barrier sometimes, it doesn't bother me. I find that there's a lot of hand gestures, and there's ways to communicate that kind of transcend actual conversations. And sure, you can't have that depth of meaning, but if you have a little phrase book. When I was in southern Tajikistan along the Wakhan Valley that borders Afghanistan, I had this little phrase book that had like 10 words in the Wakhan language. And I used a few of them. And the people were just like, he speaks the language. And it's like, I barely could read what I was reading. But they just are pleased that you try. So I think that that and just Tajikistan was wildly adventurous. So it made it much more memorable to have those experiences and just be able to connect with the people. So yeah, age is never an issue.
Thank you for sharing that. And then Amy asked, she says there are so many possible places to go and things to do and discover through these recommendations. How do you manage overwhelm and
FOMO? Yeah, no, that's a good one. Yes, I will say sometimes FOMO is there, especially when there's conflicting events. But, I really try to sometimes that's why I let circumstances dictate what I do. Like I mentioned, Scott's cheap flights, it is overwhelming. I want to go everywhere. Literally, you could hand me a ticket to, I don't even need to know where I'm going other than to whatever, pack my bags appropriately. So I think I've kind of let myself detach from having a specific interest in each place. Now, said that, I am planning to go to Antarctica early next year, but that's kind of one aspect. I might go to a lot of places before that I have not planned out at all. So I think, finding out that, oh, there's an event, there's one of my favorite bands is playing in whatever place, or, and then I know you have to kind of keep in mind the flight costs and gas. I mean, it's really high this right now. But yeah, you can actually fly cheaper to an international destination these days than you can in the United States. I mean, $1,000 to fly anywhere in the US is absolutely ridiculous. But I've seen Scott's cheap flights keep saying, $400, $200, $500 to places like the Caribbean or Eastern Europe. I mean, so I really just try not to get overwhelmed. I get excited. I think that's the thing. I might plan a trip and then I don't take it, but I've done some research because I watched a show that piqued my interest in something, and then now I'm like, oh, I suddenly want to go to this place. Well, then I get distracted by the next thing. So I think that's eventually I just pick a place and, or let some circumstance pick it for me.
Yes, I totally agree with just circumstances. I also try not to like fill my list with too many things, maybe one or two, and then seeing where it goes from there.
Yeah, like
right.
I was just going to say, like, for example, this summer, so next month, we're going to Portland, Oregon, and we're just going to be in Portland. So, but I'm going to use kind of the same ideas. I'm sure I'll go find something obscure that's in Portland, and Portland's a good place for that. And then in July, I have an event in South Carolina, and so we'll drive down from DC, and I don't have that planned yet, but I'll figure out based on the rough itinerary of, I have the destination in South Carolina, and then getting from there or from home to there and then back will be part of the fun. And that can be planned last minute, and then find out what's going on. And maybe instead of going back this way, we'll veer off here because, oh, there's some sort of festival going on.
Cool. All right, we'll do a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. And then you can always email John with any other questions that you have. Sebastian asks, how do you engage with random locals internationally when they don't speak English and you don't speak their language? I'm sure you can speak a ton on this, but.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there isn't a way to have like those deep conversations, but some of my favorite memories of traveling are, I don't know, you didn't really need the full communication. So for example, I had gotten off a train in Slovakia and I needed to get to Hungary. And so there was this ice cream store next to the train station. So I'm like, all right, I don't know, I have to sit here and figure out what I'm doing. And then people they were just curious. Okay, this guy's not from here. And so we started chatting, even though that meant saying hello and like broken language, where are you from? Like I could figure out what they were trying to ask me, but then somebody, I guess through hand gestures and maybe a few broken English phrases together, I got across that I was trying to get to the border. Well, somebody had a motorcycle and they offered to give me a ride there. We didn't have a conversation that led to that, but through hand gestures and everything. And it was one of those things, like we had an understanding of like friendliness. I don't know if that makes sense, but I've had a lot of experiences like that where you just have a moment and then you recognize it as a communication. It's just different than what you're used to. But at the same time, I find that just about anywhere I've gone, eventually you find somebody that speaks English, or they find you because you're probably going to be the one that stands out. And so they might approach you and start talking to you. But you can always ask them, do you speak English? Or if you're fluent in another language, or even if you stumble through another language, you can attempt to use that. I've used Spanish in I think in Turkey once, because we both just happen to know a little Spanish. It's just, you never know what kind of communication you're going to have, but it's fun to try, and they really appreciate it.
I've also used Google Translate to have like full on.
Yeah, that's true. I'm old school, so a lot of my travel days are from before smartphones, back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. So I think, yeah, I have used the Google translating apps on the phone to just, you can have actual conversations. Just hit conversation mode, go back and forth.
And then last question, Bree says that she loves to collect tangible things to bring back and make travel books. Beyond the stamp postcard, newspapers, or national park stamps, are there other things you collect that are paper-based to bring back?
Yes, again, I'm kind of trying to not do that as much because I really have a lot of stuff. I've also not been consistent with my collections. I've had, well, I'll say little flags, either patches or actual, small flags. I have some big flags. I have magnets, pins, but also like I do collect, or I have collected receipts. One of my first trips through Eastern Europe, you would get the receipt and it would be in a foreign language. And I was obsessed with it because it's like, oh my God, I'm actually traveling somewhere. And so I'll never get rid of this because it shows that I was there. And, but I've scanned a lot of those things now. So I now have a digital version of it. And then I've gotten rid of the paper. But yeah, I've collected rocks when you have to, there's some places that you have to be careful about taking things like that. But yeah, those are just some like t-shirts once in a while.
Awesome. I don't know. Cool. Well, thank you so much. I think I got most of the questions. If I missed it, I'm sorry. But feel free. I put John's information back down there again. And we'll go ahead and do just a couple of housekeeping reminders to wrap up. But John, this is awesome. I really, really enjoyed it. So I'm so happy I got to host this one.
And I'm just to let you know, so my I'm probably going to be doing a website revamp this year, but right now I just posted a part one of my abbreviated blog post for my first leg of the trip from when I went to Memphis for TravelCon. So I went through a bunch of little towns, and some of the pictures that I included in the slides, I explained some of the situations in that blog post. So if you want to know more about those.